Hello and welcome to Kuma English Listening Hub. In today's episode, we are going to tackle a story that takes place in Hong Kong, but whose implications reach far beyond one city. Our title is 26 November, the day Hong Kong burned its conscience, unmasking the tragedy of Wang Fuk Court. Picture the scene. It is the afternoon of 26 November, 2025, a weekday like any other in Tai Po. At Wang Fuk Court, an estate of 8 residential towers built under Hong Kong's subsidized home ownership scheme. Some residents are at work, some are out running errands, and some are at home getting on with daily life. Shortly before 3 o'clock, ordinary routine turns into a nightmare. At 2:51 p.m., a fire breaks out on the bamboo scaffolding and protective netting outside Wang Che House, one of the blocks in Wang Fuk Court. Within minutes, flames race up the exterior, igniting plastic sheeting and polystyrene foam boards fixed around the windows. What was supposed to be a repair site becomes a vertical line of fuel. The fire does not stay on one tower. It spreads along the scaffolding and the facade until 7 of the 8 blocks are burning. The estate is transformed, in broad daylight, into an inferno. Inside, reality hits fast and brutally. Some residents smell smoke before they hear anything. Others look out of their windows and see flames climbing the building skin. Many later say they did not hear a timely alarm. They received no clear audio warning telling them to leave, or the signal comes far too late. Stairwells that should be safe escape routes are quickly filled with thick, toxic smoke. For people on the mid and upper floors, the way down is already deadly. Fire crews arrive within minutes and immediately upgrade the incident as they see how fast the blaze is spreading. More units are called in, and the fire is raised all the way to a rare number 5 alarm, the highest level in Hong Kong's system. Hundreds of firefighters fight the flames for hours, then for days. One firefighter will lose his life in the rescue operation. By the time the blaze is finally brought under control, at least 146 people are dead and 79 are injured, making this the city's worst fire disaster in generations. In a place that prides itself on being modern, efficient, and well-regulated, the scale of the tragedy is staggering. And yet, the more we learn, the harder it is to call this an accident or to blame it on fate. This was not an act of nature. It was a man-made calamity. How human decisions lit the fire. To understand why Wang Fuk Court burned the way it did, we need to look closely at the conditions that existed long before 26 November. At the time of the fire, Wang Fuk Court was in the middle of a major renovation project. The estate's 8 towers were surrounded by bamboo scaffolding. Around the windows and external walls, workers had fixed polystyrene foam boards and other materials as part of the works. The scaffolding itself was covered with protective netting and sheeting. All of this created a continuous, highly combustible layer on the outside of people's homes. Investigations and media reports later highlighted that this combination of foam, plastic, and netting allowed the fire to climb with extraordinary speed. Once the exterior ignited, flames could travel rapidly from floor to floor and from block to block, while windows cracked or shattered under intense heat, letting the blaze into the flats themselves. Instead of acting as a barrier, the renovation envelope turned into a highway for fire. At the same time, the systems that should have protected residents did not work as they should. Survivors and local reporting point to serious issues with alarms and fire safety arrangements. Some residents said they never heard a building-wide alarm or that it sounded only after smoke had already filled corridors. Others found exit routes narrowed by temporary structures or construction materials. In a high-rise estate where minutes mean the difference between life and death, that delay and those obstacles were devastating. When you put these pieces together, the flammable external envelope, the scale of the renovation, the problems with warning systems and escape routes, it becomes very difficult to talk about bad luck. What we are looking at instead is a chain of decisions, sign-offs, and compromises that created the conditions for catastrophe. The companies that proposed and executed the works, the bodies that approved the project and gave safety assurances, and the regulators responsible for oversight were all part of a system that allowed a residential estate to become a fire trap. For listeners in the United Kingdom, this pattern may feel hauntingly familiar. After the Grenfell Tower fire in London, inquiries revealed how cladding choices, cost-driven decisions, and regulatory gaps combined to lethal effect. Residents had complained for years, but their warnings were not taken seriously enough. In both cases, ordinary people paid the price for systemic failure. At this point, you might reasonably ask, what has this got to do with life in Britain beyond Grenfell, beyond fire safety regulations and cladding replacement schemes? The answer is that Wang Fuk Court shines an unforgiving light on something that runs right through contemporary British society as well. A deep crisis of responsibility in how we manage housing, public services, and the social contract more broadly. Housing. A slow-burning emergency. Let us begin with housing. In Britain, the Grenfell tragedy was supposed to mark a turning point. There were promises of fundamental change. A new building safety regime, a stronger voice for tenants, a proper reckoning with decades of deregulation and outsourcing. Some progress has been made. Dangerous cladding is being removed, albeit slowly, and there is new legislation that in theory puts more onus on building owners to keep residents safe. But if you talk to people on large estates in London, Birmingham, Manchester, or Glasgow, you will hear a more sobering picture. Families still live with leaks, black mold, and dodgy electrics. Some leaseholders remain trapped in flats that are technically unsellable because of unresolved fire safety questions. Social housing tenants complain that when they report hazards, they are fobbed off, told not to make a fuss, or treated as if they are the problem rather than the people raising it. From a distance, the system can look fairly sordid. The right forms are filled in, the right inspections carried out, the right risk assessments filed away. Up close, people often feel that no one truly owns the risk. Everyone has a bit of responsibility, but nobody has enough power or will to fix the whole mess. In that sense, the logic that produced a fire trap in Tai Po is not as foreign to Britain as we might like to imagine. The cost of living and the politics of sacrifice. Then there is the cost of living crisis, which has become a kind of permanent backdrop to British life. Over the past few years, we have seen energy bills spike, food prices jump, and wages struggle to keep pace with inflation. For many families, particularly those in the private rented sector or living in older, poorly insulated homes, the result has been grimly simple. You either heat or you eat. At first glance, this may seem far removed from a tower block engulfed in flames. Yet if you look more closely, the same questions reappear. Who absorbs the risk when energy markets go wild? Who benefits when landlords pass on their costs but not their savings? Who has the power to insulate homes properly, to redesign the system so that people are not left shivering in winter in one of the richest countries on earth? Government ministers will point to support packages, price caps, and targeted schemes for the most vulnerable. Fair enough. Those measures have prevented some of the very worst outcomes. But food banks have become part of the social landscape in a way that would once have seemed frankly unthinkable. Teachers quietly top up pupils with breakfast. Nurses report patients turning up malnourished or with conditions aggravated by cold, damp housing. The British sense of keeping calm and carrying on can shade very easily into a kind of weary resignation. This is just how things are now, mate. NHS pressures, resilience or exhaustion. No conversation about British social issues would be complete without the National Health Service. For many people in the UK, the NHS is almost sacred, a symbol of post-war solidarity and a key part of national identity. Yet if you spend time listening to frontline staff, what you hear is not so much quiet pride as quiet despair. A&E departments routinely operate at or beyond capacity. Waiting lists for elective surgery and mental health services remain stubbornly high. Junior doctors and nurses talk of being utterly knackered, doing extra shifts just to keep the system afloat, and wondering how long they can go on before they burn out entirely. Public messaging often leans on words such as resilience and world-class. We clap for carers, we share heartwarming stories about extraordinary dedication, and politicians announce impressive headline figures about record funding. But beneath the rhetoric lies a more uncomfortable truth. A system can be simultaneously world-class in aspiration and dangerously overstretched in practice. If the day-to-day reality for patients and staff is one of queues, corridor care, and endless firefighting, then something is plainly not working, however glossy the PowerPoint slides in Whitehall may look. The NHS, like Wang Fuk Court, shows us what happens when institutions are asked to absorb ever more risk without the structures and resources to do so safely. Individuals are praised as heroes, while the system quietly normalizes crisis. Regional divides and the leveling up question. Another British theme that resonates with the Wang Fuk Court story is the question of regional inequality. In Hong Kong, critics have long argued that development priorities are skewed towards certain interests in certain districts. In the UK, we have our own version of this, captured in the phrase leveling up. For years, governments have promised to close the gap between London and the southeast on the one hand, and large parts of the Midlands, the north of England, Wales, and parts of Scotland on the other. There have been funds, strategies, task forces, and competitive bidding rounds for local projects. And yet, if you visit a former industrial town where the high street is half boarded up, buses are infrequent, and the local college has had to cut courses, you may well hear a rather skeptical view of the grand rhetoric. People are not daft. They can spot the difference between a genuinely long-term investment in skills, transport and housing, and a one-off pot of money for a shiny new civic center that photographs well but does not change the underlying economics. Here again, the central issue is responsibility. Who is actually accountable for ensuring that a child born in Sunderland has roughly the same life chances as a child born in Surrey? When promises of regional renewal are not kept, what real consequences follow for those who made them? Immigration, integration, and the politics of blame. Let us turn now to another sensitive and often polarizing issue in British public life: immigration and integration. In recent years, the UK has seen intense debate over everything from small boat crossings in the Channel to the treatment of Hong Kongers arriving under the British National Overseas Visa Scheme. On one side of the argument, there are those who stress control, border security, and the capacity of local services. On the other, there are those who highlight humanitarian obligations, demographic needs, and the many ways in which migrants contribute to British society. What is striking, from a language and listening point of view, is how often migrants are spoken about as problems to be managed rather than as neighbors, colleagues, or fellow citizens in the making. Housing pressures, NHS waiting times, and school places are all, at times, blamed on newcomers. Yet the underlying structural issues often long predate recent migration waves: chronic underinvestment in social housing, long-standing workforce planning failures in health and social care, and years of squeezed local government budgets. It is far easier, politically, to point at people in dinghies than to confront the tangle of decisions and omissions that produced a fragile system in the first place. You can probably hear the echo of Wang Fuk Court here. When things go catastrophically wrong, there is a strong temptation to look for neat villains or to blame bad luck. It is much harder to examine, patiently and honestly, the web of policies, incentives, and blind spots that made the disaster possible. Education, class, and the mirage of meritocracy. Another area where Britain's conscience is being quietly tested is education and social mobility. The British story, we like to tell ourselves, is that of meritocracy. If you work hard and do well at school, you can, in theory, transcend class, background, and postcode. To an extent, there is truth in that. The UK has produced countless teachers, mentors, and institutions that do extraordinary work in helping young people from less advantaged backgrounds reach universities, professions, and careers that would previously have been closed to them. But if you look at the data and listen to voices on the ground, a more complicated reality emerges. Access to high-performing schools is heavily shaped by where you can afford to live. Private schools, though educating only a small minority of pupils, remain heavily overrepresented in elite professions, from senior judges to top journalists. Internships and graduate opportunities often still favor those who can afford to work for free or to move to London for low-paid entry-level roles. In that context, the language of equal opportunity can feel, to some, like a polite fiction. Exams are, of course, formal markers of achievement, but the playing field on which those exams are taken is anything but level. What does this have to do with our Hong Kong fire? Both stories ask a similar moral question. When a system produces predictably unequal or unsafe outcomes, how long can we go on describing those outcomes as unfortunate but essentially accidental? At what point do we admit that the pattern itself reflects a deeper failure of responsibility, a quiet burning of conscience? Listening beyond the surface, for you, as a C2 level learner of English, there is an extra dimension to all of this. Advanced listening is not just about following long, complex sentences or catching idiomatic expressions like spot on, fair enough, or blimey. It is about hearing how stories are framed, who is centered, who is marginalized, and how responsibility is described or diluted. The next time you listen to a BBC Radio 4 documentary, a ministerial interview on the Today program, or a panel discussion about the state of the nation, try to tune into a few things. Listen for the moments when something is called unprecedented. Is that being used to suggest that no one could possibly have prepared, or is it a polite way of ignoring earlier warnings? Notice when politicians describe Britain as world-leading or truly global. Are those phrases backed up by evidence and policy detail, or are they doing the emotional work of reassurance without the hard graft of reform? Pay attention to who gets described as resilient. Is resilience being used to celebrate genuine strength? Or is it functioning as a convenient excuse for leaving communities to cope with conditions that should not be considered acceptable in the first place? If your analysis is spot on, you will begin to detect patterns. Certain tragedies are framed as freak events, one-offs that nobody could have foreseen. Others are acknowledged, usually after sustained pressure, as symptoms of deeper structural problems. Closing thoughts. Conscience under pressure. The fire that tore through Wang Fuk Court on 26 November was, in one sense, a local catastrophe. A housing estate in Taipo, a weekday afternoon that turned into a multi-tower inferno. In another sense, it is part of a much wider story about how modern societies, including the United Kingdom, handle risk, responsibility, and public trust. Calling Wang Fuk Court a human tragedy is not just a way of expressing sympathy. It is a precise description of a chain of human decisions. The choice of materials, the design of the renovation, the treatment of residents' complaints, the allocation of oversight, and the political calculation of how much safety is worth. In Britain, whether we are talking about housing, the NHS, the cost of living, immigration, or education, we face our own choices of this kind every day, mostly in quieter, less dramatic forms. We can continue to treat each crisis as if it were a bolt from the blue, something to be handled with a brief flurry of outrage, a public inquiry, and a set of recommendations that may or may not be fully implemented. Or we can take these events as tests of conscience, opportunities to ask in a properly serious way what kind of country we want to be, and what level of risk we are willing to impose on those with the least power to resist. For you, as an advanced learner of English, there is one final invitation. When you listen to British debates about these issues, try not only to understand the language, but also to evaluate the moral logic. Notice when responsibility is taken and when it is carefully deflected. Ask yourself who is described as having agency and who is treated as if their suffering were simply the weather. If you can do that, you are not only sharpening your English to a genuinely high level, you are also training the kind of critical listening that democratic societies, including Britain, desperately need. Thanks very much for listening to Kuma English Listening Hub. You are doing a brilliant job pushing your English into truly advanced territory. Keep going, stay curious, and keep listening carefully, not only to the words, but to the conscience behind them. Cheers for now.